Emily has a strange rule when she sleeps. She never lets her hand hang outside the blanket. It doesn't matter how hot the room is. It doesn't matter how tired she is. Before she falls asleep, she always checks the same thing. Both hands must be under the blanket. Some people think it is just a weird habit. Maybe it was just a childhood fear. Maybe something she saw in a horror movie when she was young. But Emily doesn't laugh when people ask her about it, because she knows the truth. She isn't afraid of what might be under the bed. She is afraid of what might be waiting beside it. Years ago, during her second year of college, something whispered to her in the darkness, "Give me your hand." And the most terrifying part wasn't the voice. It wasn't the footsteps. It wasn't even what happened afterward. The most terrifying part was that, at the moment she heard those words, her hand was already hanging over the edge of the bed. It happened during winter break. Most students had already left campus. The university was located in the American Midwest, and by late December, the entire campus was covered in snow. Emily had planned to go home like everyone else, but she had picked up a temporary campus job and still needed to finish a paper for one of her classes. So she decided to stay in the dormitory for 3 more days. Normally, the dorm housed hundreds of students. There were always voices in the hallway, doors opening and closing, music coming from someone's room, people laughing late at night. But during winter break, the building felt completely different. It was no longer a place filled with students. It felt abandoned. The old dormitory had been built in the 1960s. The walls were dark red brick. The window frames were rusty, and whenever the winter wind blew through the cracks, the entire building seemed to make a low, uncomfortable groaning sound. The residence director told Emily that most floors had already been shut down for the holiday. Only the second floor remained open. And the truth was, Emily was the only student staying there. She was the only person living on the entire floor. The first night was normal. Nothing happened. Emily finished her work, watched a little television, and went to bed around midnight. She slept deeply. The second night was different. At exactly 2:13 in the morning, she heard footsteps. At first, Emily didn't wake up. The sound was quiet, almost too quiet. A soft step from somewhere far away. Then another tap. A few seconds of silence. Then tap. She opened her eyes. The room was completely dark. Her phone was lying on the desk. The screen showed 2:13 a.m. For a moment. She thought it was probably the building manager. Maybe someone checking the heating system. Maybe a security worker walking through the hallway. That would have been the normal explanation. But then she noticed something strange. The footsteps were slow. Too slow. Whoever was walking outside wasn't in a hurry. Every step was followed by a pause, as if the person had to stop and think before taking the next one. Tap, tap. The sound slowly moved down the hallway, past one empty room, then another, until finally it stopped outside Emily's door. For several seconds, Emily didn't move. She lay completely still, staring into the darkness. The footsteps had stopped right outside her room, but there was no knock, no voice, no sound of the doorknob turning, nothing that somehow made it worse. If someone was standing outside her door, a normal person would knock. They would call her name. They would ask for help. But whoever was outside wasn't doing any of those things. It was just standing there, waiting. Emily slowly reached for her phone. She wanted to call the residence director, but before she could unlock the screen, she noticed something. Her right hand was still hanging over the edge of the bed. She had fallen asleep without realizing it. Her fingers were only inches above the floor. And the moment she noticed it, a strange cold feeling touched her fingertips. Emily froze. It wasn't the cold air from the window. It wasn't a draft. It felt like something had placed a finger against her hand. Not grabbing it, not pulling it, just touching it. Almost as if something was carefully checking her fingers, one by one, measuring them. Emily's heart started pounding. She quickly pulled her hand back under the blanket. And at that exact moment, the person outside her door spoke. A girl's voice. Young, soft, almost gentle. She didn't sound angry. She didn't sound threatening. She sounded like someone asking for help. Then she whispered, "Can you give me your hand?" Emily stopped breathing. The sentence itself wasn't what terrified her. If someone had screamed at her, if someone had threatened her, maybe it would have been easier to understand. But this voice, it sounded sad, like a child who had lost something important, like someone who had been searching for a long time. Emily stared at the door. She wanted to answer. She wanted to ask who was there, but something inside her told her not to. The hallway outside became silent again. The footsteps returned. Tap, tap, tap. The sound slowly moved away from her room, down the hallway toward the stairs. And then it disappeared. Emily didn't sleep for the rest of the night. When sunlight finally came through the window, she convinced herself there had to be an explanation. Someone had entered the building, maybe another student, maybe a maintenance worker, maybe someone playing a cruel prank. She repeated those possibilities over and over, because the alternative was something she didn't want to consider. The next morning, Emily went downstairs to find the residence director. His name was Mr. Harris. He was a man in his 50s who had worked at the dorm for many years. When Emily told him what happened, he didn't laugh. He didn't tell her she imagined it. Instead, he asked her a strange question. Did she knock? Emily frowned. No, Mr. Harris looked down. Then he asked, did you answer her? Emily shook her head. No. For a moment, the old man said nothing. Then he looked toward the hallway behind Emily, almost as if he was making sure nobody else was listening. Finally, he said, old buildings make strange noises during winter. Pipes, heating systems, things like that. But Emily noticed something. He wasn't looking at her, and his voice didn't sound convincing. It sounded like someone repeating a sentence he had said many times before. That night, Emily decided she wasn't going to take any chances. She pushed a chair against the door. She placed her phone beside her pillow, and she kept a pair of scissors on the nightstand. She didn't believe in ghosts. At least, she told herself she didn't. But she was starting to believe there might be someone else inside the building, someone who should not be there. At exactly 2:13 a.m., the footsteps came back. This time, Emily was awake. She was sitting on the bed, staring at her phone, waiting, listening. The sound came from the far end of the hallway. Tap, tap, tap. But this time, something was different. The footsteps sounded wetter. Each step made a faint, sticky sound, like the person walking outside had just come in from the snow, or from somewhere much colder. Emily held her breath. The footsteps stopped, right outside her door. Then the girl's voice returned, quiet, almost desperate. Please, Emily felt her fingers tighten around the scissors. The voice continued. I can't find it. Emily didn't want to answer. Every part of her mind was telling her to stay silent. But the voice sounded so real, so human. Finally, without thinking, she whispered, What are you looking for? The hallway went silent. Not normal silence, a heavy silence. The kind where you suddenly realize you made a mistake. Emily immediately regretted speaking. Then, the girl's voice came closer, much closer, almost as if her mouth was pressed against the other side of the door, and she whispered, My hand. Emily felt all the blood leave her face, because she suddenly understood something. The girl outside wasn't asking for help. She wasn't looking for someone to open the door. She wasn't lost. She was missing something, something she believed Emily had. Yours will fit. Emily didn't remember how long she stood there holding the scissors. The words kept repeating in her mind. My hand. Not a hand, not your help, not something I lost. My hand, for some reason. That sentence scared her more than anything else, because it meant the girl outside her door wasn't looking for a person. She was looking for a replacement. Emily stayed awake until sunrise. When the first light entered the room, she finally moved. She slowly walked toward the door. Every step felt heavier than the last. She looked at the chair she had pushed against it. Still there, the lock was still closed. Nothing had entered, at least. Nothing she could see. Emily took a deep breath and opened the door. The hallway was empty. Completely empty. The old dorm looked exactly the same as it always had. Cold, silent, normal. Almost too normal. Then she looked down and saw the footprints. They started near the staircase. Small footprints, wet footprints, a trail of watermarks leading down the hallway. Emily stared at them. The shoes were small, almost like the footprints of a young woman wearing old-fashioned winter shoes. The strange thing was, the footprints only went one direction from the stairs to her door. They stopped directly in front of her room. There were no footprints going back, no return path, no explanation. It was as if whoever had walked there had never left. Emily took pictures with her phone and immediately went downstairs. This time, she didn't ask Mr. Harris if someone had been walking around. She simply showed him the photos. The moment he saw them, his expression changed. The color drained from his face, and for the first time, Emily realized something. He wasn't surprised. He was afraid. Mr. Harris closed the office door. Then he locked it. "Emily," he said quietly, "do you know what this building used to be?" She shook her head. "No." He looked at the old dorm keys hanging on the wall. Then he said, "Before it was a university dorm, it was part of a women's college." He paused. 40 years ago, a student disappeared here. Emily felt a chill move through her body. "What was her name?" The man hesitated, then answered, "Sarah Bell." Sarah was a student during winter break. Just like Emily, most people had already gone home. The campus was almost empty. One night, after a heavy snowstorm, Sarah left the dorm and never came back. The last person who saw her said she was walking near the frozen lake behind the campus. When she returned to the dorm, she was soaked. Her shoes were covered in snow and water. That night, Sarah's roommate heard something strange, someone knocking on the hallway doors, over and over again. But when people opened their doors, there was nobody there. The next morning, Sarah was gone. Police searched the campus. They searched the lake. They searched the surrounding area, but they never found her. No body, no evidence. Nothing. The case eventually went cold. But years later, students who stayed in the dorm during winter break began reporting the same thing. A little after 2:13 in the morning, they heard wet footsteps in the hallway, and then a girl's voice. Always the same question. "Can you give me your hand?" Emily stared at Mr. Harris. How many people heard it? The old man didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said, "Enough." Emily felt her stomach tighten. "What happened to them?" Mr. Harris looked at her, and for several seconds he said nothing. Then he answered, "That depends." "On what?" "On whether they answered." The room suddenly felt much colder. Emily remembered her mistake. She had spoken. She had asked, "What are you looking for?" She had answered the thing outside her door. Mr. Harris noticed her expression. "You answered her, didn't you?" Emily slowly nodded. The old man's face became serious. Then he said something that Emily would remember for the rest of her life. "Tonight, don't sleep in that room." The university tried to move Emily to another location. But that afternoon, a major snowstorm hit. The roads outside campus were closed. A power problem affected part of the building. Maintenance crews could arrive until morning. "If you hear anything," he said, "call me immediately." Emily packed her bags. She didn't. She planned to spend another night there. She just had to survive until sunrise. At 11 p.m., the lights on the second floor went out. The hallway disappeared into darkness. Emily sat on her bed wearing her coat. Her suitcase was ready. Her phone was fully charged. She kept checking the time. 12:30, 1 o'clock. 1:30, 2 o'clock. The closer it got to 2:13, the more she felt like the entire building was waiting. Not sleeping, waiting. Then her phone screen suddenly went black. The room lost power. Complete darkness. Emily froze, and then she heard it, a sound she had been hoping would never come again. Tap, but this time, it wasn't outside her door. It came from inside the room. Tap closer. Tap closer. Emily stopped breathing because the footsteps weren't walking toward her. They were already there. Emily didn't move. She couldn't. Every instinct in her body was screaming at her to run. But her legs refused to obey. The room was completely dark. No hallway, no footsteps outside, no distance between her and whatever was there. Only silence. Then, tap. The sound came again, right beside her bed. Emily slowly pulled the blanket higher. She didn't know why. Maybe because some part of her still believed the blanket could protect her. Like when she was a child, like every child who believes monsters cannot reach them if they can't see them. But Emily knew better. Whatever was in the room already knew where she was. She closed her eyes. She tried not to breathe too loudly. Then she felt it. A drop of water landed on the floor. Drip, a second drop. Drip. Emily's entire body went cold. Because the sound wasn't coming from the hallway. It wasn't coming from the window. It was coming from the side of the bed. From something standing beside her, something wet. Something that had followed the footprints all the way here. Then the mattress moved very slowly. The bed sank slightly. As if someone had sat down beside her, Emily pressed both hands against her chest. She didn't scream. She didn't move. She didn't even open her eyes. Because deep inside, she knew something. If she looked, she might see it, and if she saw it, it might know she was looking. For a long time, nothing happened. The figure beside her didn't speak. It simply sat there, waiting. Then Emily felt a cold breeze move across her arm. Something was close, very close, and then the girl whispered, "She took my hand." Emily's heart almost stopped. The voice was different now. It was still soft, still gentle. But there was something underneath it. Pain, a sadness that felt much older than any person should carry. The girl continued, "I searched for it for so long." The mattress sank a little deeper. I knocked on every door. A pause. But nobody gave it back. Emily finally understood Sarah wasn't asking for help. She wasn't trying to enter the room. She wasn't trying to scare anyone. She was trying to finish something. Something she had started 40 years ago. She was searching for what was missing. The blanket suddenly moved very slightly. A small pull at the edge. Emily grabbed it tightly. The movement stopped. For a few seconds there was silence. Then the girl whispered, "Give me your hand." This time, it wasn't a request. The blanket slowly began to slide downward, not violently, not like an attack, almost carefully, almost patiently, as if whatever was underneath knew Emily had nowhere to go. Emily held on with both hands. Her fingers were shaking. She could feel something touching the other side of the blanket, a cold hand pressing, searching, trying to find where her hands were hidden. The blanket reached her shoulders. Emily squeezed her eyes shut. She thought about screaming. She thought about running. She thought about everything Mr. Harris had said. Don't answer her, but she had already answered. It was too late. The blanket moved lower, lower, until suddenly a loud crash came from downstairs. The entire building shook. Then the fire alarm exploded through the darkness. Beep. The sound was deafening. The pressure beside Emily disappeared instantly. The mattress rose back. The cold vanished. Emily ripped the blanket away and jumped from the bed. She grabbed her phone and ran. When she reached the first floor, Mr. Harris was standing in the lobby. His face was pale. Emily could barely speak. "What happened?" The old man looked toward the dark staircase. "I heard knocking." Emily froze. "From where?" Mr. Harris looked at her and answered. The next morning, campus security and maintenance workers searched Emily's room. They found nothing, no broken lock, no hidden person, no sign that anyone had entered. But beside Emily's bed, they found something strange, a small wet mark on the carpet. At first they thought it was just water, until they looked closer. The shape was wrong. It wasn't a footprint. It looked like someone had been sitting there, someone missing a right hand. Emily left the dorm that same day. She never stayed there again. A few months later, she transferred to another school. Years passed. She graduated. She got married. She moved to another state. Eventually, the memory became something she tried not to think about. Until one winter night, it was her first winter in her new house. Emily woke up suddenly. She didn't know why. The room was dark. The house was silent. Then she heard it, a sound she had not heard in years. Tap. A pause. Tap. A pause. Tap. Her heart sank, because she already knew the time. She looked at the clock, 2:13 a.m. The footsteps stopped outside her bedroom door. Emily didn't move. She didn't breathe. She didn't answer. Then a familiar voice whispered from the other side. Soft, gentle, almost exactly the same as before. "Can you give me your hand?" Emily closed her eyes. She knew that voice. But something was different, something was wrong, because it wasn't Sarah's voice anymore. It was hers, Emily's own voice, coming from the other side of the door, and then it whispered, "I found one." A pause, a soft breath. "Now I only need the other." So if you're listening to this story tonight, before you fall asleep, there is one thing you might want to check. Make sure your hands are where they should be, especially the one hanging near the edge of the bed, because sometimes the thing waiting in the darkness isn't trying to get into your room. Sometimes it was never outside your room.